Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial, and in this tutorial I'm going to be teaching you how to make a slider. We're going to be making this slider using HTML and CSS, and really it can work for also if you're using WordPress, which is definitely one of the most mainstream ways of designing websites these days, but it could also work for that. I mean, they definitely have widgets for you to use, but if you want to make your own personalized one, you can also use some extensions that let you write HTML code and CSS code, or do a mix of both using the WordPress builder and your custom CSS, all to be able to make a custom slider. So if you follow along with me, let's begin this tutorial so you can make your own slider. Alright, so the first thing that you're going to need is to gather your images. So for this specific tutorial, I'm going to be using designing a slider that would be more towards a restaurant or a supermarket or something like that. So these are the images that I'm going to be using. So we have a fish image, creme brulee for the dessert, pasta, french fries, a roasted chicken, and some dry aged picanha, which is a Brazilian steak. And we have all of those 6 images, and we're going to be adding all of those 6 images in the slider so that we essentially have 3 images showing, and as they're rotating either to the right or to the left, you choose whatever direction you want. The other images are going to disappear and the 3 images are going to be on the screen, and then when it moves to the right, the rightmost image is going to disappear and the next image that was on the left outside the screen is going to show up, and it's going to keep doing that in a continuous infinite loop, or for however long you want the loop to go on for. And that's how we're going to get our slider, and it's very important, of course, that we make it look continuous. So that's what we're going to be tackling today. Okay, so with those images in mind, I think the most important thing for us to do to start is to go to the index.html file. Now, if you take a look over here, first of all, I changed the side that my camera's on because I realized that while I was coding, it was over the code. So change it to the right now so you guys can see everything that I'm coding. And as you can see here, I have 2 index.html file and 2 styles.css file. The only reason for that is because here I have the actual code that I already wrote. So all of this stuff over here, and this is where I'm actually gonna go through it with you guys. So the first thing we're gonna need to do when we start this our little slider of ours is of course start with the basic skeleton information for the index.html file. This is what you're gonna use every time you're programming something in HTML. So if you're using VS Code, all you can do is exclamation mark, and it's already gonna autofill for you as it shows over there. You press enter and it fills out all the information for you. Now if you want to know more about what that is, you can search it up online, and I'm sure you can find everything about it. But all that we care about at this moment is this head element, which what we're gonna use it for right now. Inside of it, we're going to add a link to our style sheet.css, to our styles.css sheet. So the styles.css sheet is everything that we're going to customize, right, in our index. So everything goes in the style sheet. Now you could add your styling inside of the index, but it's much better to add it in a separate file because it keeps everything organized and it just lets you do things much easier. So with that in mind, all we need for this link tag is to add the relationship that it has to the index.html, which in this case it would be a style sheet, and right next to it we add the href, which is the reference of where it is in our file. So in this case, our index.html file is in the version 2 folder, and our styles.css is also in the version 2 folder for this one. So all we have to do is type the name, styles.css, and we can close the link, and now it's already connected. So now everything that we do in the styles.css is going to translate into our HTML elements. So now we can move on to adding the actual code. So the first thing that we need is to add a div. Now what a div is, essentially it's not anything by itself, but it's something when other things are inside of it. So a div is like a container, and everything that we add in that div stays inside that container. If I add a title, so an h1 element, if I add an image, and if I add a subtitle, if I add it inside that div, all of those elements are their own individual element, but if I move that div, they're all gonna move together. If I added the background of that div, it's gonna go in the background of all of those items. That is the first thing that we need, and we're going to give this div an ID. Now we need to give this div this ID so that we can edit it in the styles.css. And the ID that we're gonna give it to this one is the food container. Actually, let's not put the dash there. Food container. So this div, I will explain more on it when a little bit later on. Now inside of the food container div, we're going to add another div. And for this one, we're going to give it the ID of food wrapper. And once again, I'll explain a little bit more about what each of these are, because it might seem a little bit redundant to add two divs inside of each other. But trust me, we'll get to it and it will all make sense. So I think the most important step for us to do right now, which is when we're at the step that we're actually going to start adding our content. And those are going to be in the form of images. So to add an image, we open img, close, and now comes all the information that we add inside the image. The first thing is the source. And as we looked at the images earlier, let's just add those. Now, a good thing that you can learn from right here is that the images, the photos, it's in the photos folder. And the photos folder comes from if there's a hierarchy, right? We're inside of the versions 2 folder. And this is our index.html and it's inside of this version 2 folder. But the photos is not in the version 2 folder. It's on the same level as the version 2. So what we have to do is why did I forget what that's called? That little bar, bar or whatever it's called. And now that moves us back to the directory before. So we're now in the same level as the version 2, which as you can see, we can go inside the version 2 again, which would be redundant, which doesn't make sense. But we're going to the photos, and we're going to add our first image, and it's the fish. Now it's super big, right? You can't really see anything. It's super zoomed in. So definitely not ideal right now. But we're going to work on that so that we can make it in a right size. Now, if you're wondering how I can see the images and the live feedback of what I'm doing under my code, all you have to do is this. You go into your index file, you right click, and you search up show preview. This is an extension that you can get by going here and searching up live preview. And there's going to be a bunch of them. But if you just download one, you click show preview and it's going to show to the side. But I think it's better to show it at the bottom since it just gives you a bigger screen to work with. So after you do that, you go here at the top, right click, split down. And now that it's split down there, you bring it to the bottom and you can close this if you want. You can leave it there too, in case you got to close this for any reason. That's still there. But easy, simple, that's all you do. Now we got to finish with the image that we just added. And the things that we need that are left, we need an alternate text. Now what this does is, in case your image doesn't render, it's going to show this alternate text so that the user can know what image was supposed to be there. And it is also very helpful for people with disabilities, people who are blind, so that they can see what the image that is there actually is. If they have a screen reader, which is something that a lot of those people have, it's gonna describe to them what the image is. So this is just a fish meal or a fish plate or a fish dish, whatever you want. And then the last thing we need, which is extremely important, is to add it to a class. And the class we're gonna add it to is the food class. Now, what this is going to do is every item that has the food class is going to have the same adjustments that we're going to add in the styles.css to the food class. Now we're going to get more into that after we're done adding all of these images. Okay, so now that I have added all the images, I want you to take note of something. And that is that we added 3 repeated images. The creme brulee, the fish meal, and also the picanha. So we added those 3 repeatedly, 2 times, right? At the bottom, we repeated those 3. And that's actually a really important thing that we're going to see later when we actually make our slider animation. But for now, keep those there and just keep that in mind. But now we're going to go into our styles.css sheet and notice how all of these items, all of these image elements, they all have the class of food. We're going to go into our styles and we're going to start making that class of food. So we type a dot because it's a class, dot food, open brackets, close bracket, and we're going to start by adding those adjustments that we want to make to this class. Okay, so this is the information that I added to the food class. Now, the first thing is the width, and that's a width of 600 pixels for each image. Gives it a pretty good width and height. And the reason I went with this is because I want to make a slider that has 3 images at once on the slider. So that's kind of the width that I found to work out pretty good. But if you want to have 2 images show up in the slider at once, you can double that size, 1200. If you want more, you can decrease it by a little bit, 400 should work. And yeah, but that's just kind of a personal preference, but that's what I'm going for on this one. Now, I decided to give it a border radius of 40. Now what this does is it adds this little circular edge. So it doesn't make it too square, but it adds this edge to give it a nice, nicer look to it, a little bit more gentle. But again, that's up to your preference. All of these numbers and most of these things are all up to preference. Now I added a border of 3 pixels, solid and white, because we're going to make the background of the slider black. So it's going to give a nice contrast. It's going to make it look very fancy, very rich, if you could say so. And the border is solid, meaning it's just a solid line. There's no dots, there's no dashes, it's just solid and color white. And the margin, 70 pixels. This is going to come into play a little bit later, but it's just so that we get the right spacing and exactly 3 items in the slider at once. So now that we have that out of the way, the next thing that we have to do is to edit our food wrapper div. Now, for our food wrapper div, this is going to be essentially the part that's going to be the items are going to be moving around. This is what's going to make the items move around. So let's go into the styles.css sheet again, and we're going to see how this is going to work. Okay, so to start editing our food wrapper div, the first thing we need is to actually declare that we're editing it here. And this time we do it with a hashtag, not with a dot, because this isn't a class. This is an ID. Now keep in mind that if it's an ID, there can only be one item with that ID. You can't repeat it. But for a class, you can add that same class to various items. But we can't have 2 divs with food wrapper, but we could have 2 divs with food. Just like we have 8 images, or yeah, I think it's 8 images, right, with the food class. So hashtag food wrapper, which is the one we use for an ID, open brackets, close brackets, and these 3 are the things that we're going to add. Now, if you look at the display flex, what this does is this essentially puts all of our items so that they are in this one line. Think of an imaginary line, and they're all going along that line. Now you can do a lot of different edits with flex that makes it very easy for you to justify your content, for you to align your content, for you to make it be positioned in however you desire. Now, right now, the way that this wrap is working is it goes you can scroll all the way from right to left. Of course, that doesn't look professional, which, you don't want your user to have to be scrolling right to left to find more information on your website. The most you want to do is they have to go up and down, right? They have to keep going down to find more information. Now, we could essentially add a flex wrap attribute and set it to wrap, which essentially what this is going to do is every time that one of the items feels like doesn't have enough space to go on screen anymore, it's going to put the items on the next imaginary line that goes under that line. So as you can see, we have 3 items over here, and then it goes and puts the other items down, 3 more, and then down again, 3 more, 2 more, because we don't have a 3rd one. So that's what the wrap does. Now, you would think we would use that, but we're not going to use that right now, and actually at all in this tutorial for this slider, because we're going to be using something else, which is when the food container actually comes into play. Now we're still going to edit some of these things in the food wrapper, but not for right now. But real quick, the gap, essentially what the gap does is it adds space between these items. So this space that you see over here right now, both the gap that's over here in the food wrapper and the margin left on the food, they're both playing a role in this, in the position of these items, in the spacing of these items, but we need them both. because the margin left is essentially going to ensure that this item over here isn't touching this edge, and the gap is going to make sure that these items have a space between themselves. And the width is set to 100%. This is going to make sure that the food wrapper div has the exact same width that the food container has. Now moving on to our food container, we're going to declare food container hashtag food container, open brackets, close brackets, and we're going to be adding these three attributes for now. Now the width is 100%, which is what we want. We want it to take the whole screen. The padding is 60 pixels on the top and the bottom, and 0 pixels on the left and the right. Now, what the padding does is essentially this. Let's look at a margin first. The margin simply, if I have this box the size of my hand, if I have a margin of 0, that means whatever comes before is going to be glued to it, and whatever comes after is going to be glued to it as well. If I put a margin of 100 pixels, that means that whatever comes before it is going to be spaced out. And at the bottom, it's also going to be spaced out. If I also have 100 pixels of margin on the left and right, it's also going to be spaced out on the sides. Now the padding is a little bit similar, but essentially what the padding is doing is it's not only spacing out, but it's filling the inside of that space with something. The margin simply spaces it out and doesn't do anything to it. It's going to be at whatever the default is. The padding is going to space out and is going to fill that space inside. So as you can see here, we have this black background only on this part, right? If I increase this a little bit, we have this black background only on the wrapper, right? And the rest of the background is white because the body of our document, right? The body of our HTML file is blank. It's white background. So, but as you can see, the background doesn't stop. The black background doesn't stop when the image stops. It keeps going 60 pixels at the top, 60 pixels at the bottom. If I were to change this to a margin, this is what would have happened. Now, as you can see, the black background stops as soon as the image is done. As soon as the image is done, it stops. It goes up to the height of the image. Now, if I were to add an item, it wouldn't spawn right here. It would be a little bit lower, but it would still be this white space. Now with the padding, it would spawn in the same spot, but there's this black space here showing that we're still in the wrapper. This is still a part of the slider. So that's why we use the padding. Now, if you remember when I was talking about the wrap modes, the flex wrap, how you could choose to make your items wrap to the bottom, we don't have that right now, right? Which means we can literally just scroll to the right here, and it looks pretty ugly because you don't want to have a website that does that. And also the background is not even in here, right? It's just white background. So that's where this next attribute is going to come in, and that is the overflow attribute. Now we're going to set the overflow attribute to hidden. And what this is going to do is exactly as it sounds like. It's going to hide everything that is not in our viewport, everything that's not in our computer. Now you may be asking yourself, well, how are we going to see the items? Now the items are still there. They're still on the right. They're still over here, but we just can't see them, but they are there. Now this is where our animation is going to come in, because now we're going to shift our items one by one to the left, so that every time it shifts to the left, the fish is going to disappear and the next item is going to disappear. Now the creme brulee, which is going to be over here, is going to disappear, and the next item is going to appear over here. But everything that is not on screen right now, including the items that are going to go to the left, that's not going to show up. It's like it's not going to be there. Now this is going to be one of the most interesting parts of our program, of our slider, and that's where we're going to make the slider itself, the animation of the slider, so it can actually turn into a slider. Right now it looks like a slider, but it doesn't behave like one. So that's where we're going to add our animation. So to make an animation, you put the @ keyframes. Now you always have to put keyframes, and you're going to name your slider. We're just going to do food slider. Now we're going to open the slider, close it, and now comes the three parts where we specify what change we want to make. So the first part is, where in the animation are we talking about? So we always start with 0%. Now later on we're going to add how long it's gonna take, but let's just say this animation we want it to last, let's get an easy number, 10 seconds. So first at second 0, which is at 0%, we're going to, we are going to add now this is the second part, what do we want to change? We're going to do a transform. Now, transformation is either you're going to move the object from one place to another, or you're going to rotate the object, or you're going to scale the object. But the one we're going to focus on is on moving the object. So we want to transform the object. What exactly do we want to do? We want to translate. Where do we want it to translate? On the x-axis. The x-axis, right, is the horizontal axis. The y-axis is the vertical, but we want our slider to move horizontally. So translate x, and we're going to, at 0%, we want the slider to be exactly where it is right now. So this is not going to change anything. And then we're going to semicolon, so that we can move on to say that command is over, and now we're moving on to the next one. Okay, so now we go into our next one, and that is going to be at 20%. So if our slider is 10 seconds, it's going to be a second 2. Now, where does it have to be a second 2? We're going to do the same transformation, right? Transform, translate x, parentheses, and we're going to specify it. At second 2, now this is all going to change based on how big your items are, how many items you want to be on your screen. For mine in specific, so you're going to have to do trial and error for this. If we wanted to move to the left, which is what we're going to do right now, we're going to move it negative 750 pixels. So essentially what I'm saying here is when this animation gets to 20%, I want it to be at pixel negative 750 pixels in relation to where it is right now. And then we just keep going with this. So now lastly at 100%, one last time, transform, translate x, negative 3750 pixels. And that should do it. And that should be it for the keyframes. It's not that hard. It's just a matter of trial and error. So now how do we actually implement, right? Because we have it, but nothing's happening to our code. Nothing's happening to our images. Well, we're going to go into our food wrapper over here, and we're going to add animation. Now we're going to start with the name of the animation. So this one is food slider. We're going to say how many seconds we want it to go for. So let's say 10 seconds. 10 seconds. And how many times we want it to repeat. So if you have a website, you're realistically going to want it to be, for a restaurant website, you're going to want it to be infinite. So we add infinite, and as you can see now, it's going to rotate through each of those images. And it's just going to keep doing that until it gets back to the fish image and it restarts. Now, as you can see, this is a perfectly good slider. It looks very nice. It has 3 images at the same time, and it keeps repeating the loop. Now, realistically, I think that a better time is 15 seconds, but you can do a bunch of different sliders with this, and you can even add links to each of the images so that whenever someone comes to your website and they want to, let's say, click on an image, let's say you want to link this fish image to a recipe, they can click on it, and as they click on it, it sends them to that fish recipe. And you can do a bunch of different things, but that is pretty much what you need to make the slider. So now that we're at the end of this tutorial, this is how the file looks, the HTML file looks. We have the food container div, we have the food wrapper div, and we have all of our images. And this is how the styles.css file looks. We have the food class where we're editing all of our images. We have the food wrapper where we're essentially formatting our images in the way that we want to, and where we're adding our animation. And we have our food container class, which is where we're storing, where we have that background, and it's where we're hiding all of those items that shouldn't be there. And it's where we're also making the adjustments that we want to, like the padding to our background and our animation. So guys, that's it for our tutorial today. I hope this tutorial was able to help you with whatever you needed to make on sliders. I hope that it helped you learn something new. And if you liked that tutorial, if it helped you out, please consider giving this video a like. Comment below something that you found helpful, something that you didn't know, something that you still want to learn, or if there was anything that was confusing, comment so that I can help you guys out. And if you're looking for a website and you want someone to make that website for you, feel free to contact me. My email is down below. We can definitely work around your needs. Just email me so that we can get going on whatever you need, what type of website you want. Anyways, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.